Absentee ballots and no dumbest bill in America. This is Mark Fisher with Mark and the Millennials, and the Millennial joining me today is, of course, Christopher Hopkins, our producer, on the other side of the camera. Welcome, everyone, to this episode of Mark and the Millennials. We are titling this episode Absentee Ballots. Look, folks, there has been so much debate about the voting in the United States of America, and what's interesting is that ever since 2020, the issue of absentee ballots has come to the forefront, at least for Republican voters and thinking voters. I do believe that there are a lot of thinking Democrats and unaffiliated voters who realize that a lot of things have gone wrong and can continue to go wrong if we have elections in certain states, at least, running the way they're being run with mass absentee ballots. Although I will say that most Democrats love the absentee ballot matter for all of the wrong reasons, at least the ones that I know, the Democrats that I know. They, generally speaking, like absentee ballots because they feel like it enables them to do a lot of nefarious things in elections, which of course they do. But we're going to talk about this, podcast listeners, in much more detail. And first up in this subject matter, Colorado was caught trying to register illegal voters. They sent, according to the Colorado Democrat who sent them, incorrectly 30,000 voter registration cards to illegals in California. So this has been in a number of different newspapers. It indeed happened. Of course, it was in the Colorado newspapers as well. The Democrat-controlled Colorado Secretary of State's office said that it mistakenly sent 30,000 voter registration cards to illegal aliens and non-citizens. Democrat Secretary of State Jenna Griswold said her office sent postcards that encouraged Colorado residents to register to vote. So it's not enough for her to, of course, send out voter registration information to those individuals who are registered. She's soliciting people and actively solicited people who aren't even citizens of the United States of America. State Department employees looked at 102,000 residents whose names, so it's technically not the State Department of the U.S., but the Secretary of State's office in Colorado, looked at 102,000 residents whose names were given to them by the Electronic Registration Information Center, a nonprofit organization from which most states receive notices about eligible voters who have not yet registered to vote. The names that Eric provided to Colorado's SOS office matched the names in the Department of Revenue's list of residents with driver's licenses. But that driver's license list did not have a normal formatting component that would have allowed employees to identify illegal aliens who received a license under a special program. Well, I thought we had this thing called Real ID that the United States Congress passed, where all 50 states had to implement in those states, in the way that those states chose to implement their licensing requirements for driver's licenses, or if you're not a driver, but you are an adult, an ID form, which looks similar or is similar to a license, but just doesn't allow you to drive since you don't have a driver's license, that provides verification through the Real ID program that you are indeed a citizen of the United States. So obviously this is bogus in Colorado that they somehow didn't have some of the correct formatting on driver's license to really know who was and who was not illegally present. But that driver's license list did not have normal formatting component that would have allowed employees to identify illegal aliens who received a license under a special program. Yeah, very special. Those illegal aliens, though, possessing a driver's license are not eligible to vote. Yeah, no kidding. Apparently they're eligible to drive, but they are supposed to have driver's licenses, which identify them as not American citizens, as opposed to those who have a real ID, which means they are American citizens. Griswold sent cards in both English and Spanish in a subtle attempt to encourage illegal aliens to unlawfully register to vote. Exactly. The cards specify that only citizens aged 18 years or older can register to vote in Colorado, which, of course, I'm sure is why they sent them to illegals. So, look, I had to get my new driver's license and I had to get a real ID. And I remember how upset I was initially because I thought, wow, I have to provide my original birth certificate. Original. Okay. Then I had to provide a second form of ID, and it couldn't be my existing driver's license or credit card. It had to be another form of ID. So in theory, I think the state that I live in, which is Maryland, allowed me to use my passport because obviously when you get your passport, you have to provide those similar documents. But Maryland was not satisfied with just the passport. They also wanted, at least at the time that I registered, which, by the way, wasn't that long ago, for my real ID, my actual birth certificate. So I provided that information. I thought to myself, I can't believe this. Born and raised in the United States of America, okay, always followed the rules, followed the laws, and now here I have to go and prove that I'm an American citizen. And the reason I have to prove that I'm an American citizen is because we have open borders in the United States of America. So the citizens in the United States of America are being put in this situation where they are almost second-class citizens because they no longer feel like they belong here or feel like they are American citizens because they're asked to prove that they are indeed citizens of the United States. Then I thought about it a little bit more and I thought, okay, well, I'm sure the Real ID program was put into place by the United States Congress for the purpose of doing what? Well, basically separating those with IDs in the 50 states as those 50 states choose to implement the program between those who are actual American citizens and those who are not. So you have people who are driving with driver's license where it's been verified that they are indeed not citizens. So this is the bedlam that the United States government has created for us. And I give you that background because it allows states like Colorado and any other state that wants to, where they have a crooked Democrat in charge. And if you ever notice, ladies and gentlemen, and this is a fact to my Democrat listeners, it's only the crooked Democrats that are in control of the voter registration apparatus in certain states. It's only Democrats who are in charge of the voter apparatus in those states who are engaging in this kind of fraud. You're not going to see a Republican who's the Secretary of State or head of a board of elections send out actual solicitations to people who are illegally in the United States and asking them to register to vote. It's always the left that does this. And this story is important because it takes me to another story that is directly related to this idea of open borders, real IDs, registering illegals, whether intentionally or not, and then getting them to vote, and also connected to absentee ballots, ladies and gentlemen. So in Pennsylvania, I'm sure that you all recall that in the 2020 election, there was an absentee ballot just disaster. Okay. And of course, if you're a Democrat, you're like, it wasn't a disaster. It was a success. Yeah. As a Republican, and more importantly than that, ladies and gentlemen, as an American, I believe that you should be voting in person. And you've heard me say this many times before, but we're going to talk about this in more detail as to why this is so important. So, interestingly enough, in Pennsylvania, you had one case where an individual was running for a judgeship and there were 257 mail-in ballots that weren't counted in his race because they weren't dated. That's the thing about this, okay? You have a mail-in ballot. It's sent to you. The mail-in ballot is mailed to you. You receive the mail-in ballot. You mark your mail-in ballot and vote for the person or persons that you want to win. And then you put the mail-in ballot, in theory, in at the post office. I'm guessing that's probably the best place, although naturally in 2020 it was drop boxes as well, which created another problem. but you put a stamp on it. And in theory, you're supposed to date. You're supposed to date, your actual mail-in ballot. Now, why are you supposed to date it? Because when you have drop boxes, ladies and gentlemen, there's no postage mark going on the absentee ballot. It's not going through the postal system. So there's no way for the postal system to say, oh yeah, we received this the day of voting, so therefore it should be counted. And here is the stamp that stamps that it was processed through the postal office on the day of voting, but not after. You can't do that with a drop box, of course. And what you can do is, even though, and we all know this, by the way, that there's no way that the drop boxes were picked up in a timely manner the night of the election, when the election was over. So all of these problems occurred in Pennsylvania, and they were logistics problems, but they were also problems that were created intentionally. And so you have this guy, he's running for a judgeship. His name is David Ritter, and he's a Republican, and he was ahead in the race. But then there were 257 mail-in ballots that didn't have dates, so no one actually knew when they were cast. So think about this. It's the day of the election. Then it's the night of the election, and you're winning, and you've won, except for the mail-in ballots. And miraculously, there are 257 mail-in ballots that happen to change the outcome of the election, and they don't have dates on them because we don't know when they were actually cast, because we have drop boxes rather than them being processed through the post office. So the Supreme Court of the United States of America finally has heard this case, if you will, and they vacated an appeals court decision. The Supreme Court did. So the Supreme Court vacated the appeals court decision that required Pennsylvania to count those ballots, even though they didn't have a date. So in other words, the Supreme Court said this decision by the appeals court is vacated. It's gone, doesn't exist, because it is wrong. So we have a really quick news story on this. This is actually from the Epoch Times, because God knows you won't hear this from CBS, NBC, ABC, MSNBC, or CNN. And we have this real quick clip, and here it is.
The Supreme Court just ruled that Pennsylvania doesn't have to count mail-in ballots if there isn't a date on the envelope. The decision vacates a previous ruling by a court of appeals. The case centers around David Ritter, an unsuccessful Republican candidate for county judge. Ritter lost his 2021 bid after just over 250 mail-in ballots that didn't have dates were counted. The Supreme Court also overturned the ruling that allowed the county to count those ballots. It doesn't change Ritter's loss in the case, but it does mean that it can't be used as a precedent.
So yes, so you have this new story that has come out. Remember, it's a couple of years after the actual 2020 election, and you have finally this case working up to, and has worked up to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court heard it and it's like, yeah, no, that's you can't have absentee ballots that aren't dated, because the whole point of having absentee ballots is to demonstrate that you voted in a timely manner by the time that the election is actually over. The day of voting, those absentee ballots are in theory supposed to be in the possession of the Board of Elections and or dated in such a way through the post office that they were received in a timely manner. Okay, fine. This makes perfect sense. But ladies and gentlemen, this underscores what I'm talking about. This conversation underscores why absentee ballots are so disastrous to the health of our elections and to the actual belief that we're having free and fair elections. And what's different now, as opposed to all of us discussing this, let's say a year ago or 2 years ago, is now we actually have these cases and the truth is coming out. And we're hearing these stories one after another where just mysteriously, a ballot doesn't have a date on it. Okay, well, here's an idea, because I know what the folks on the left are going to say. They're going to say, oh, well, it's because the poor elderly people and people who are of color, they just don't know how to fill out their ballot properly. I've heard this before, by the way, and I'm not making this stuff up. I've literally had Democrats say to me in the legislature, well, people who are homeless, they don't know how to fill these out. People who are black and brown. I actually had a delegate say that once. A member of the House of Delegates. They don't know how to, many of them at least, don't know how to fill out ballots properly and don't know they're supposed to be dated. And in addition to that, there are a lot of elderly people who, just have some memory loss and they don't recall or remember that they had to have put the date on there. To which, of course, you can say, well, if they actually mailed them, then there would be a stamp on there from the post office, which would say when it was received and processed. Or if they don't know how to properly mark a ballot. And by the way, ladies and gentlemen, there are a lot of people that don't, to be fair. Okay, they don't. That's why you vote in person, because you have election board people there and poll watchers there to assist you. And guess what? When you do vote in person, you know that when you finish marking your ballot, at least in my state, there's a paper ballot that you mark. And when you are finished marking the ballot, you then scan the ballot yourself into a scanner that then counts that ballot. And then that ballot then drops inside of that scanner so you have a paper backup. That's how that occurs in my state. And if you ever have an issue while you are voting in person, the day of the election, or early voting, by the way, you just ask someone that's there, hey, look, I'm a little confused about this ballot. I'm a little confused. What I'm confused about is the fact that there are 3 candidates that are here on the ballot for this particular school board race, and it says I'm only supposed to vote for 2. What if I want to vote for all 3? People ask questions like that, okay? It happens all of the time. And so, what won't happen when you vote in person? When you vote in person on the day of the election, you know what will not happen? You will not forget to date the ballot. You want to know why you won't? Because you're obviously voting on time, because you're there in person. And so we have this issue with absentee ballots in Pennsylvania and other states where absentee ballots were cast. They were not dated. Obviously, they weren't postmarked because they were put into drop boxes. No one knows how they got there. No one knows who filled them out. No one knows when they were dropped in there. No one knows actually even where they came from. No one bothered to call the people who voted to see if they actually voted, I don't think. And all of that could have been avoided. All of that confusion of not properly dating your ballot could have been avoided if the people just showed up and voted in person, including early voting. So if you have a week of early voting, 7 full days of early voting, and then you have the day of voting, so you have 8 days of in-person voting between early voting and the day of voting, what more do you need? What more do you need to make sure that your ballot counts? And so we have this really strange thing in the United States of America, this strange phenomenon where the Democrat Party has decided, for whatever reason, and it's always Democrats, ladies and gentlemen, and for you Democrats that are listening to me, you know it's true because I've seen how you vote on these issues. I've been there and watched you. I've heard your BS arguments about the need for mass mail-in balloting and also drop boxes and your arguments for ballot harvesting. I mean, it's just incredible. And I've heard all of those arguments, and yet all of your arguments are literally what is undermining the people of the United States believing that we have free and fair elections. And that is the worst possible thing for our republic. And yet the solution is obviously so simple. So you have to have the Supreme Court of the United States of America actually weigh in after the lower court said, oh, no, you can count those ballots even though they're not dated. What's the purpose of having an election day then? What's the purpose of having a beginning and end of an election day? Because the end of the election day means that's it. You don't get to keep voting to get the outcome that you want. Oh, yeah, you get to keep voting until you get the outcome that you want. That's what the Democrats clearly are trying to get to. So the Supreme Court had to take this case and say, no, we're going to vacate those lower courts' decisions. And from this point forward, you cannot count these ballots. Now, of course, it's up to the legislatures now, the state legislatures in Pennsylvania and elsewhere, to fix this problem. What is the problem that we're trying to get them to fix? To basically bring voting back to in-person voting, where you have to do a number of things. One is you need to show up during early voting or the day of voting, and you need to show your ID, your real ID. Yes, your real ID, because that obviously demonstrates that you are really a citizen of the United States, and then vote in person. And when you have issues or concerns, you just ask the people there. So it's very transparent who's voting, who's there, and who's being helped. And there are no issues. Because I'm pretty sure that if you voted in person, you're not going to have any of the issues that have come up since the 2020 or during the 2020 election and concerns about cheating, because of the simple fact that you have all of the people that are in there who are knowledgeable the day of voting and early voting to assist you. And so even in Wisconsin, we've had this issue as well. So get this. In Wisconsin, the judge orders officials to stop allowing voters to spoil ballots and cast new ones. Okay, this is a brand new story that just came out. So voters in Wisconsin can't cancel their ballot and cast a new one once a vote has been cast, a state judge has ruled. Think about this. You cast your ballot and then you come back and say, well, I want to cast a new one now. Well, a judge in Wisconsin has said, nope, can't do that. So Waukesha County, isn't that how you say it? Yeah, Waukesha. I always have a hard time with that name because it's just, I know it's a Native American name, but it's just like kind of out there. So Waukesha County Circuit Court Judge Brad Schimmel granted a request on October 5th for a temporary injunction against the practice, which had been promulgated to officials across the state by the Wisconsin Election Commission. Wisconsin voter Nancy Cormanek sued the Wisconsin Election Commission over its guidance, which states that clerks can give completed and submitted absentee ballots back to a voter, arguing that doing so violates a Wisconsin law that states that the clerk shall not return the ballot to the elector once submitted. The guidance was issued after several candidates dropped out of high-profile races, including Democrat candidates for the U.S. Senate, such as Alex Lasry. Schimmel, a Republican and a former Wisconsin attorney general, sided with Cormanek and ordered an injunction. That injunction took place, on October 7th. Restoring Integrity and Trust in Elections is representing Cormanek. The group was started by a former Bush administration official, Karl Rove, and others. Quote, today's ruling is another major victory for Wisconsin voters. WEC's unlawful guidance destroys voter confidence and taints the integrity of Wisconsin's elections. Once a vote is cast, it is cast, period. Derek Lyons, president and CEO of the group, said in a statement. So, folks, here's actually what happened in Wisconsin. They're basically saying in the 2020 election, at least the Wisconsin Election Commission was saying, it's okay to cast a ballot that is a mail-in ballot. So you fill it out at home, and then you mail it in, or you put it in a drop box like they did in 2020. And then once it's cast, a week later or 2 weeks later, you basically call the Elections Commission in Wisconsin and say, well, I want to do a redo. I want to revote. Now, imagine all the things that can go wrong with that, right? So the ballot is in. Okay. It's been collected. It's there at the Wisconsin Election Commission. And now people are like, oh, I want to change my vote. I want to alter it. So, folks, that has created bedlam in Wisconsin. And this goes to the broader conversation of this podcast about absentee ballots as to why it is so important to bring voting back to in person in Wisconsin, in Pennsylvania, in Michigan, in Nevada, in North Carolina, in Arizona. Fix all of these states, in Georgia. By fixing, I'm saying we have to have early voting combined with the day of voting. Look, for me personally, I think the day of voting is sufficient, but fine. I've compromised. Early voting, a week of early voting plus a day of voting. That's enough. Show up and vote. Then there aren't going to be any issues with your ballot because by definition, you were there and you did cast your ballot and you take responsibility for how you cast it. You don't get to change it once you leave. Okay. Oh, I've left and I've cast it and I've scanned it into the machine. Hey, I want to come back and change it now. Nope, not going to happen. And this is how we can finally repair our system. And I just want to finish with this, ladies and gentlemen. It is, and I've said this already, but it's important to underscore this point. It's exclusively the Democrat Party and the Democrat operatives and the Democrat elected officials who want to game our election system by expanding absentee ballots, by allowing them to be counted without being properly dated or dated at all, by using drop boxes, by not having voter ID, and by having endless elections where there's really no beginning and end to the election. It's just an election that continues until the outcome is one in which they agree with. So next up, podcast listeners, chocolate bars lead to a brawl. So this is a pretty incredible story, I have to tell you. This happened in Texas. So get this. So it was at a restaurant in, I think it was Plano, Texas. So there's this restaurant in Plano, Texas, and these teenagers walk inside and they're trying to sell chocolate bars, the teenagers are, to people inside of a Hooters restaurant. And so it's a Hooters restaurant in Plano, Texas. The teenagers that are 15 years old, there's several of them. It says 4 kids actually under the age of 15. So 4 teenagers under the age of 15 walk into a Hooters in Plano, and they got chocolate bars. Why Hooters? I have no idea. And they're selling chocolate bars to the customers inside the restaurant, meaning that, you know, Hooters sells food and they sell alcohol, obviously. They think they sell entertainment, and naturally, they don't want people coming in from the outside and selling food because that's how they make their living. So as you can imagine, what ended up happening is the manager and managers came over to these young men and said, you know, I'm sorry, but you have to leave. You can't be selling food inside of a restaurant where we sell food. Okay. You want to do that? Open up your own restaurant. So the kids, of course, got very, very nasty. And then a brawl broke out. And the brawl that broke out involved a couple of the folks that work for the restaurant, including the manager, the young teenagers, and a couple of adults. So I guess had asked them to walk in because the teenagers were working on behalf of a couple of adults who were selling, quote unquote, chocolate bars. Really odd story, I know. But what's remarkable about this is that the individuals that had walked in without any shirts on, right? So they're walking in like with shorts and no shirt and like, you know, barely dressed selling chocolate bars. I mean, it's just like, it looks like a third world country. I'm sorry. That's what this feels like sometimes. We have this clip and here it is.
Tonight, we're getting our first look at video of a brutal fight at a Hooters restaurant in Plano. It happened Thursday at the Hooters on North Central Expressway. Plano police tell us 4 juveniles under the age of 15 came into the restaurant to sell some chocolate candy bars. When the manager asked them to leave, they got angry and started throwing things, and then this happened. 3 adults came in and attacked the manager and other employees.
It is very shocking. you don't know what's going through people's minds when they do an attack like that, just out of nowhere, really unprovoked and for no reason at all.
Plano police tell us the manager got hit with a hard object and reported a broken arm. Investigators are reviewing this video and identifying individuals, but there haven't been any arrests so far.
So no arrests so far because they haven't been able to track these kids down because it all happened so quickly, not to mention the adults that were also part of this brawl. I'm telling you the story, ladies and gentlemen, because there is an obvious, and I really do believe sometimes I'm one of the few people that it's willing to talk about this openly. There's an obvious cultural problem in the United States of America. These gentlemen were black. And I want to go down the issues that I think are a problem. Okay. First of all, the lack of respect for others and walking into a restaurant without a shirt. Okay. It's a restaurant, right? You're walking into the restaurant without a shirt. You're like barely dressed. And then the lack of respect because you're walking in the restaurant and you are trying to sell food to people who are in a restaurant. So the lack of respect for the owners of the restaurant and the owner's ability to be able to make a living. And then the lack of respect for adults and private property who tell you, I'm sorry, you're actually trespassing at this point because you are breaking our rules. We want you to leave. And there seems to be this deep-seated cultural problem because you have adults that have encouraged these young teenagers to do this. So it's not even like these were young teenagers on the loose going, hey, I have an idea. Let me just go and try to sell and make a few dollars by selling chocolate bars inside of Hooters. No, you actually have adults giving them the guidance to do this. And this is not just limited to Plano. This is happening across the United States of America. And it's like, nobody wants to talk about it. And I would love it if we could have this real conversation with individuals on the other side of the aisle, which not always is the case, but tends to be the case, who are Black elected officials, who are willing to actually talk about solutions and how we fix this very deep-seated cultural issue that seems to be based on a lack of respect, a lack of a willingness to want to follow the law, a lack of understanding of any of the basic rules of civility. And I actually have a story that I want to share with you that is very much been on my mind for a while. This goes to this Plano, Texas particular event. So you've heard me say before, I'm in the House of Delegates. Yes, I'm in the House of Delegates, in the Maryland House of Delegates. And every day when you serve in the House of Delegates for the 90-day session, there's a 90-day session. You have to meet for 90 days and you debate bills and so forth. Obviously, at some point in the middle of the day, you want to go get lunch. So I went with a group of my colleagues and we went to a restaurant in downtown Annapolis to get lunch. And I want to preface this by saying this happened this year. So it happened in 2022. Now, keep in mind that restaurants in my state have been absolutely under siege between closings from COVID, where they were forced to close, to which, by the way, in my state was quite severe. The lockdowns were quite severe, to now inflation and cost of goods of food to be able to make a living are out of control. So these restaurants are like literally barely staying open in downtown Annapolis. This is the state's capital, and they're barely making it. And they're barely making it because food costs so much, because people are eating out less, and also because of the simple fact that they have lost so much money from the COVID lockdowns, and they can't at the same time find anyone who actually wants to work in the kitchen and serve food, because people are being paid to stay home in my state and sit on the couch. I'm talking about able-bodied people. So this is so it's like this confluence of all of the worst possible things that could happen to a restaurant and restaurant owners. And so the story goes that some colleagues and I decide midday to get lunch, and we go down, we walk downtown Annapolis, and it's January or February. I forgot which month it was. It was an unusually kind of warm day. It was about 60 degrees outside. Typically, it's much colder. And the downtown restaurants are still operating with kind of tents outside, even in 2022. Some of them are, so that you can eat with inside the tent, and there's the heater, or you can also eat inside the restaurant if you want. And so the city of Annapolis did that to give them more space, hopefully assisting them to be more successful, if you will. But I digress. So we go inside this restaurant, we order food. And it's a locally owned restaurant. And we all start talking, we're kidding around and joking. In comes to the restaurant about 5 of my colleagues whom I serve with in the House of Delegates. In other words, they are elected officials as well. And they arrive in this locally owned restaurant with their Mission barbecue food. In other words, they went to another restaurant, which was about a half a block away, called Mission Barbecue. Yes, that's a chain. All right. And you can eat in Mission Barbecue. You can carry out. They carried out their food because the ambiance there isn't as nice, to say the least. It's not, as the restaurant that we were at, even though it's just a regular restaurant that we're at. But it was a pretty cool place, kind of neat, kind of pubby kind of place. And they brought their food over. They walk inside the restaurant, put their food down, and start eating the food from another restaurant. And so this chocolate bar Brawl in Plano, Texas reminds me of this incident because the colleagues I'm talking about were also black. Okay? Now, you might say, oh, Mark, that's racist. Look, ladies and gentlemen, I'm so tired of this term because I believe that we are a post-racial society. I think we were past all that stuff. I know I am, which is why I'm willing to talk about this stuff openly. I'm willing to talk about it openly because that's a problem. It's a problem when you have a restaurant that has barely been able to keep their doors open. It's a locally owned restaurant. It's not like a major chain. And this locally owned restaurant in downtown Annapolis is like operating on a shoestring, had the crap kicked out of it from COVID, from the lockdowns, and then food prices through the roof because of inflation. And then they can't find anyone who actually wants to work anymore, to do this kind of thing, to wait on tables and to work in the kitchen and to clean the bathrooms. And then you have these 4 or 5 individuals who are elected officials, think that they're so special that they buy food because the law doesn't apply to them. They make the law. And they buy food from some other restaurant, Mission Barbecue, bring it in this restaurant because it's a nicer place to eat, spread out all of their stuff over the table and start eating. And to that, the waitress came over and said to the individuals that were sitting at the table, gentlemen, can I get you anything? And they're like, oh, no, we're fine. Yeah, we're good. We're good. We've got our food. We don't need anything. And so she said, look, I'm really sorry, but when you're sitting in our restaurant, you actually have to, order our food from our menu. And you have to order, our drinks from our menu as well, if you want to drink something as well. You can't bring your food in. To that, the same gentlemen were like, well, I don't understand what the problem is. And she says, well, it's the health department issue, right? We didn't serve you this food, sir. But in addition to that, this is how we make our living, And so I think they thought about it. And because my friends and colleagues were sitting together in a table literally right next to them, I think they realized that we would be able to call them out on it if they had made a scene, which they were about to do. And then they chose, I guess, to kind of buckle under, and they packed up all their food, which they had already started eating, and wrapped it all back up and put it inside their carryout bags, and then walked out of the restaurant. And who knows, maybe they took it to another restaurant for all I know. I'm not really sure. I'm telling you this story, ladies and gentlemen, because this is a problem of respect and understanding of the way our economy works. It is a cultural problem. It must be addressed. And these gentlemen that I'm talking about in the restaurant in Annapolis, they knew what they were doing was wrong. Okay. So this is what's important about this. I think the individuals who are engaging in this activity, whoever it may be, no matter their color, I think they do know what they're doing is wrong. And what I don't understand is why do it at all? And I'm probably, I talk to you this way because I know so many people who own restaurants. I have so many friends who are in this business and they are struggling. And you see this, you're just like, man, like, where is America today? Why is it that it just seems like so many communities continue to degrade? And why can't we just talk openly about the issues that we're having in different communities in the United States of America? Why can't we just openly have those conversations and take the word racism out of it, take the word racist out and just talk about it openly? And unfortunately, so many people are afraid to do that. And it's a sad time that that's the case. But once again, this chocolate bar brawl in Plano, Texas kind of underscores the issue because it's adults that have encouraged and asked the kids to do this, to sell these chocolate bars in the Hooters restaurant and in downtown Annapolis. These are all adults. In fact, they're elected officials who clearly don't think the law applies to them or just don't care about their impact on everybody else. And then go ahead anyway and just do what they want because they just think they're so special and that the law does not apply to them. So next up, podcast listeners, they are not your children. Yeah, so get this. So Kamala Harris, the Vice President of the United States, she uses, according to the Daily Wire, the latest word salad about children, but stops just short of saying kids belong to the government. So look, ladies and gentlemen, I want to say something very clear about Kamala Harris. She's just a stoner. I'm just convinced the woman's a stoner. Every time she talks, she just sounds to me like a San Francisco stoner who has had way too much weed throughout her life. But I also do believe, in addition to her stoner background, that she really does believe that children, once born, don't really belong to parents. And this is worth talking about because it tells you how the leadership at the highest levels of the Democrat Party really don't respect parental rights. And by the way, Joe Biden, just as bad. I mean, obviously, Joe Biden is a dumpster fire when it comes to the way he's raised his own children. I think we all know that. I mean, his children are a mess. And you have to ask yourself, what happened in that household when they were being raised, where Joe Biden just has children that are a complete and utter mess? He probably was an absentee. I don't really know. I'm not really sure. Something happened. I mean, there are various stories that are out there. Well, Kamala Harris, here she is. She's on the Monday evening appearance with Seth Meyers, the so-called comedian. And she joins the host of NBC's Late Night with Seth Meyers. At one point during the interview, she argued that the government had to prioritize climate change if it were serious about prioritizing the children. And what she does is she says something that's really kind of fascinating. And she kind of bites around the edges of who the children belong to, but then suggests that they're really not your children. The children that you've given birth to, that you have created, are not yours. We have a clip on this, most definitely worth listening to, and here it is.
But I mean, truly, when when you see our kids, and I truly believe that they are our children, they are the children of our country, of our communities. I mean, our future is really bright if we prioritize them, and therefore prioritize the climate crisis and the need to address it.
So, that's Kamala Harris. So you have to understand, if you're not watching the podcast, what she did here, she said, quote, "When you see our kids, and I truly believe that they are our children," and she waves out her arms like this to the audience. They're our children, like they're ours, all of ours. They're not your children, they're ours. They are the children of our country. They're the children of our country, not yours, our country. They are the children of our communities. I mean, our future is really bright if we prioritize them. Yeah, if you get them to become boys and girls boys and what have you. Yeah, it's really creepy. And therefore, she says, prioritize the climate crisis. I mean, really, really weird stuff going on in the Democrat Party there. And not just with, of course, the lower level crazy Democrats, but also people at the very highest levels like Kamala Harris, where she actually had this interview, an appearance on the late night show with Seth Meyers, and she's basically talking about how children don't belong to you, they belong to the government. Look, ladies and gentlemen, that is some weird stuff, okay? It's just some really crazy stuff. And it underscores what we've been talking about for a long time on Mark and the Millennials about how really the Democrat Party no longer believes that children belong to you, which is why people across the country are arguing for parental rights, which you and I believe, of course, that is kind of a basic God-given right because they are your particular children because you gave birth to them, you created them. But at the same time, the Democrats don't believe that. So next up, podcast listeners, we have the Daily Biden Dumpster Fire. Yes, the Daily Biden Dumpster Fire. And we have a clip for you. And I want to see if you can actually catch what is wrong in this clip. We're going to play it right away. And here it is.
Let me start off with 2 words. Made in America. Made in America.
So, did you catch that? Let me just start off with 2 words. Made in America. So it's 3 words, okay? That's Joe Biden, but there's more to this story. And you may have heard this. You may think, okay, I know you're thinking this, especially the Democrats. Oh, Mark, you're just being really petty, making fun of the old guy because, you know, he makes this mistake all the time. It's not fun anymore. Folks, there's a lot more to this story. So Joe Biden said this during his visit to Hagerstown, Maryland, my home state, where there is a Volvo manufacturing plant. So in Hagerstown, Maryland, which is Western Maryland, there is a Volvo manufacturing plant. And so Biden went there and he's decided to pivot, of course, as a gentleman who his entire life has believed in outsourcing the entire U.S. manufacturing businesses and manufacturing economy to China. So that's what he's done his entire adult life. And suddenly he goes to Hagerstown, Maryland, to the Volvo plant, and he says, 3 words, made in America. There's only one problem, ladies and gentlemen. It's not just the Biden administration and Biden, of course, who's been bought and paid for by China. But do you even know who owns Volvo? Joe Biden? Do you even know? So get this. So the Zhejiang Geely Holding Company, ZGH, commonly known as Geely, Geely, so a lot of people just call it Geely for short, is a Chinese multinational automotive company headquartered in Hangzhou and Zhejiang. The company is privately held by Chinese billionaire business magnate Li Shufu. So in mainland China, ladies and gentlemen, is Geely, the Geely company, the Chinese company. And you know, of course, the Chinese Communist Party, the CCP, has all of their hands in this pot as well, naturally, because that's what they do. Volvo is owned by a Chinese company. So Biden goes to Hagerstown, Maryland, and what does he do? He basically says, well, we need to have manufacturing that's made in America. And of course, to be fair, the jobs are in Hagerstown, Maryland, so the jobs are American jobs. But the fact of the matter is, the company is not American. It's a Chinese company. And so some people may say, oh, well, Mark, we have plenty of like foreign companies in the United States that make stuff. That misses the point. The car was invented in the United States of America. Why aren't we making like American cars in the United States of America? I'm not saying that you can't make, of course, Japanese cars or cars from our allies like Japan and Germany, for example. But the idea that we have this Chinese company, and Biden goes to this Chinese company in Maryland and says, made in America. It's just a big joke because it's almost completely pulling the rug out from under him and saying, see, Joe, you've always been a phony. You've completely outsourced manufacturing to China, and now you're saying made in America for a Chinese company. And the media totally did not cover that at all because it's like, oh, yeah, it's made in America. Yeah. Well, you think the profits are going to stay in America? I don't think so. I'm pretty sure the profits are going to be repatriated to China. Of course they are. So in CBS, and I just had to read this because it's really kind of funny. So CBS Baltimore, a completely corrupt news outlet, just like all of CBS, they write, President Joe Biden made a visit Friday afternoon to Hagerstown, where he delivered remarks about the state of the United States economy and thanked local manufacturers. The president spoke at Volvo Group powertrain operations and gave praise to their manufacturing team. I'm here at this mobile plant to thank workers and management for building heavy-duty engines, transmissions, axles for trucks, and buses, and parts for electric car in the future, Biden said. Biden addressed building the economy from the bottom up and middle out, according to the White House. Biden spoke for about 20 minutes. And so they continue. Biden said, our job market continues to show resilience as we navigate through this economic transition, Biden said. For some time, I've been saying that what we need to move from a historically strong economic recovery to a more steady, stable one. We need to bring inflation down with giving up the historic economic progress and working class and middle class people have. So here's a guy talking about the middle class and the working class, and his entire career, as I've said, has been focused around enriching himself and his family with their Chinese connections and outsourcing manufacturing to China. And CBS News, the article that I just read you, never once mentioned the gaffe. I mean, they're literally electioneering for Joe Biden, because why wouldn't they? Why wouldn't they? Because in this daily Biden dumpster fire, you got Biden once again making a gaffe that if any Republican did that would be like front page news in every media outlet. By the way, it would be front page news in Fox News as well, because it's funny. It just goes to what a phony this guy is. It's not just the stupid comment, 3 words, 2 words, what have you. It's the fact that he is all in for China and that no one wants to talk about the fact that his entire career has been about that. And now suddenly he's about made in America. Complete and utter nonsense. So I just want to play this clip one more time before we close out. Here's the clip. Listen to it.
Let me start off with 2 words. Made in America. Made in America.
And that's the daily Biden dumpster fire. And that's it for Mark and the Millennials. Thank you for joining Mark and the Millennials. This is Mark Fisher. Thank you to our producer, Christopher Hopkins. Check us out on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Getter, True Social, Rumble, and our website. See you next time.